Have you ever stopped to think about what truly happens when both you and the narcissist fall silent at the same time? Not the version you share with friends, not the story you replay in your mind, but the reality that emerges in the space no one talks about. What unfolds in that quiet moment when the messages stop, when the attention fades, when the chaos suddenly disappears? Why does this silence feel heavier than any argument ever did? And why does a part of you sense that this stillness isn't the end, but the beginning of something more unsettling, something the narcissist never wanted you to see? Stay with me because what happens in that silence is the part they never warn you about. When both you and the narcissist stop communicating, the world doesn't settle. It doesn't become calm. It actually cracks open in ways most people never notice because in that very moment, someone loses control, and it isn't you. Many believe that mutual silence means the relationship has ended or the story is finished. But the reality is very different, much deeper, and far more unsettling. Mutual silence is the point where the narcissist starts to unravel psychologically. And it's also the moment where your healing, your clarity, and your emotional freedom finally begin to grow. If what you're hearing feels familiar, pay attention. You need to grasp the psychological landscape you're stepping into. Knowing what truly happens after silence is the only way to break the emotional cycle for good. It's the only way to free yourself from patterns that have controlled you for too long. The real battle doesn't happen in loud fights, endless messages, or emotional begging. It happens in the quiet, and silence exposes everything. When contact ends, the first thing that occurs inside the narcissist is what I call the recalibration phase. This moment is subtle, quiet, and deeply psychological. Most people don't notice it because it happens internally long before the narcissist sends a message, reappears, or tries to reconnect. When you go silent, you see it as setting a boundary, choosing peace, or pulling yourself away from chaos you can't handle. But the narcissist does not see it that way, not even close. To them, your silence is data. It's information, something they must analyze, not respect. They begin by figuring out how they lost their grip on you, not how they hurt you. They don't consider your pain, confusion, or emotional damage. Instead, they ask different questions. Did you get distracted? Are you punishing them? Is there someone else? Are you testing them? Did you grow stronger without them realizing? In their mind, your silence is a threat to their control. Silence is not closure, it's resistance, and resistance unsettles them. During this recalibration, they may not reach out at all. Their silence is often strategic, not emotional. They watch quietly, checking your online activity, your stories, posts, followers, or engagement. They look for clues about your emotional state, whether you're hurting, angry, moved on, or waiting for them. They react like detectives, not partners. They assume you'll come back, that you'll break first. They rely on the patterns they conditioned in you, your guilt, fear of abandonment, desire to fix things, and tendency to apologize even when it wasn't your fault. But when you don't break, when you don't react or reach out, that recalibration becomes unstable. Panic begins to echo in their mind. The control they built over you starts slipping. Because in a narcissist's world, silence is never neutral. Silence is either a chance to regain dominance or a direct threat to their ego. The longer your silence lasts, the more the ground feels like it's shifting beneath them. For you, silence feels completely different. You carry the emotional weight, loss, sadness, heartbreak, disappointment, betrayal. You try to understand what happened, what you accepted, what you allowed, and what you ignored. you grieve the relationship, but even more, you grieve the version of yourself that tolerated so much pain just to feel noticed. Your silence comes from exhaustion. You reached your limit. You can't carry any more chaos. You're reclaiming your identity, self respect, and inner peace. You face painful memories, question why you stayed so long, and feel guilt mixed with relief, pain mixed with clarity. Meanwhile, the narcissist doesn't feel lost like you do. They don't reflect deeply. They don't think about how they hurt you. Their first reaction isn't heartbreak, it's disruption. Your silence interrupts their routine, not their heart. They're used to your attention, whether positive or negative, used to your explanations, fixes, comfort, and defense. When you go quiet, that flow of validation stops. To them, this isn't emotional devastation, it's annoyance, like when a favorite app stops working or a usual source of entertainment disappears. They think, why aren't they responding? Why aren't they giving attention? That's the difference. You feel emotional loss. They feel a disruption in supply. You're mourning connection. They're analyzing access. You're healing. They're recalculating. Over time, the gap becomes clear. You see how heavy the emotional labor was, how much you tolerated, suppressed, and sacrificed. You realize you held the relationship together mostly on your own. Silence isn't punishment, it's liberation. The narcissist, on the other hand, experiences confusion, not regret or guilt. Confusion because the tricks they used, silence, blame, guilt, emotional distance, stop working. Confusion because their control is fading and they can't read your mind. Nothing terrifies them more than losing influence over someone they thought they owned. When both remain quiet, the narcissist doesn't see silence as peace or reflection. They see it as rebellion, disrespect, a refusal to stay in the role they assign. Narcissists view relationships as hierarchies, not partnerships. Your silence disrupts that hierarchy, removes them from the emotional center, and strips away the spotlight they relied on. Arguments fed their ego, but silence strips it away. Silence exposes weakness, shakes identity, and forces them to face themselves, something they avoid for life. Mutual silence becomes the turning point. Your silence frees, strengthens, and restores you. It destabilizes the narcissist, threatens their ego, destroys their script, and becomes the one thing they cannot control. You rise in it. They fall. You heal. They lose control. Your silence breaks the pattern, and they break the illusion. That moment of quiet shifts everything in your favor. Narcissists can't handle uncertainty, and your absence creates a space they cannot control. They interpret silence as disrespect or a challenge. Their inner dialogue twists you're ungrateful, being difficult, trying to provoke them. Some see it as a battle to win, others as betrayal. Even after mistreatment, they reinterpret your silence to protect their self-image. As tension rises, control slips. Silence becomes a mirror to their insecurity, prompting new stories to reclaim power. They may assume you'll break first or plan emotional manipulation. Silence threatens their ego because it signals your independence. For you, silence is space to breathe, reflect, and process survival. For them, it's psychological emptiness. They've spent a lifetime avoiding loss of control. They don't understand mutual boundaries. They see disengagement as a break in the system that maintains their identity. Their self-esteem is external, built on your attention and responses. Your silence disrupts it, exposing dependence they cannot admit. Your absence shows you stepped out of the role they assigned, shaking their carefully constructed identity. Without your reactions, they have nothing to manipulate. Your absence is threatening not because they care, but because it disrupts control. Their inner state becomes unsettled. They replay conversations, fear someone else, or plan ways to regain control, even without contact. Silence becomes louder for them than you because they cannot see your inner world. They lose centrality in your life, moving from arrogance to worry, entitlement to suspicion, confidence to instability. All of this starts from something as simple as your absence. When silence lasts, the narcissist often attempts hoovering, baiting, or triangulation to fill the void. These strategies are deliberate psychological tools to regain control. Hoovering begins when they see silence isn't temporary. They send nostalgic messages, sudden pleas, or act unusually attentive, not for connection, but to reclaim control. If hoovering fails, they move to baiting, trying to provoke reactions. Anger or love doesn't matter, just as long as you respond. Silence removes their power. Baiting is a tool to regain relevance. If that fails, they triangulate, involving others to create tension and reassert dominance. It's about control, not genuine connection. Proving your value, explaining yourself, or trying once more to secure the place you once held in their life. It's a subtle pull, one meant to make you doubt your silence, question your strength, and feel uncertain about the distance you've created. These actions are not acts of love, they are signs of emotional dependency, signs of a person who constantly needs outside energy to stay upright. The narcissist relies on external validation to maintain their fragile identity. The moment you remove that validation, even for a short while, they start to panic. They scramble for emotional attention, like someone gasping for air underwater. They use hoovering, baiting, triangulation, guilt trips, subtle remarks, indirect messages, or sudden emotional swings. None of these behaviors come from a genuine place. They are attempts to regain psychological control. Their reactions stem from fear, entitlement, and a bruised ego that cannot understand why you suddenly stop feeding it. And all of this is triggered by something as simple and powerful as your silence. As the quiet stretches on both sides, something shifts within them, something they were unprepared for. While you may feel the quiet as the first moment of peace you've had in a long time, they experience it as growing tension and fear. They don't see your silence as calm or maturity. They see it as a loss of control. Their identity is held together by the responses of others. When those responses disappear, especially from someone they once drew close, the emptiness becomes an internal alarm. It feels as if the spotlight has gone off, leaving them in a dark room where they can't recognize themselves anymore. Your silence becomes their emotional shadow. They need constant attention, admiration, conflict, reassurance, drama, anything that places them in someone else's emotional orbit. Without that energy, they feel something crumbling inside. They don't know how to regulate their emotions without external support. And your silence removes the very structure they relied on. Slowly, they begin feeling insignificant, unimportant, and invisible. These feelings are unbearable because they strike the deepest fear hiding beneath their personality, the fear of being irrelevant and ordinary. Meanwhile, something entirely different starts happening inside you. Your nervous system, which has been living in constant tension, emotional confusion, and unpredictable stress, finally gets a chance to relax. The mental fog begins to lift. You start noticing small moments of peace, tiny pockets of calm that feel strange but healing. You feel parts of yourself returning, pieces that were pushed aside just to survive the relationship. You begin to remember your own identity without their voice hanging over every thought. You start feeling stronger, clearer, and more grounded. This contrast between you and them grows as the silence continues. They may replay memories in their mind, wondering what went wrong. They might imagine scenarios, obsess over old conversations, or invent stories about why you no longer respond. They don't miss you as a person. They miss the attention, the emotional supply, and the reflection of themselves they used to see in your face, your words, and your reactions. Meanwhile, you feel a growing sense of relief. The emotional intensity starts to fade. You begin to realize how much of yourself you lost while trying to keep them stable. Your silence heals you but destabilizes them. You begin to feel your inner world rebuilding, a world that was once overshadowed by their moods, expectations, and emotional demands. They, on the other hand, feel their constructed identity slipping away. They experience a loss of control, a loss of power, a loss of the emotional fuel that kept them inflated. Your silence becomes their unraveling. As the quiet continues, something deeper shifts inside you. It is not just emotional clarity, it is a reawakening. Your nervous system, which lived in survival mode for so long, finally gets a chance to stop bracing for the next emotional blow. They created an environment where you had to be alert, always reading their reactions, anticipating their moods. Your body learned to expect tension even during quiet moments. So, when silence arrives, it may feel unnatural at first. You might feel uneasy or restless. You may feel tempted to check on them, break the quiet, explain yourself, or wonder if staying silent is right. This is not weakness. This is your body recalibrating after emotional trauma. Over time, the fog lifts further. You notice how differently you feel when you're not constantly waiting for manipulation or conflict. Your sleep becomes a little deeper, even if gradually. You experience real stillness, moments where you realize the weight of carrying someone else's emotional instability. You start to feel the shape of your genuine thoughts again. You reconnect with your own intuition, a voice silenced by their constant demands, expectations, and emotional storms. Meanwhile, the narcissist unravels. They feel emptiness they cannot fill. They feel dull, unnoticed, and forgotten. They may reach out, not out of love or change, but out of panic. They might send small messages, indirect signals, or suddenly appear warm and nostalgic, trying to reopen a connection. They do this because they miss your emotional supply. Even negative attention is better than silence. Your anger, frustration, tears, they all once gave them a sense of significance. Without your reaction, they feel emotionally starved. But inside you, a deeper shift happens. For the first time, you see their behavior clearly. You recognize patterns you once normalized. You see how much energy you spent understanding them while ignoring yourself. You realize how often you blamed yourself for their actions. You see how your world revolved around maintaining peace with someone who never gave emotional safety. You begin to understand that this silence, this quiet space, is not empty. It marks the start of your recovery. You see their attempts to reconnect are not genuine. They are attempts to pull you back into the emotional cycle where they had power. This time, you feel differently. You feel distance where there was attachment. You feel clarity where there was confusion. You feel strength where there was fear. As you grow stronger, they become more desperate. The silence hurts them because it exposes weakness in their identity. It forces them to face emptiness they avoid at all costs. Your silence becomes the mirror they cannot control. It is the boundary they cannot cross. It is the end of the emotional cycle they relied on. Over time, something else changes in you. You remember who you were before them. You reconnect with old interests, old dreams, and old parts of yourself abandoned for their chaos. You see the world differently. You imagine a future that isn't shaped by their emotions. You appreciate calmness that once felt awkward. You trust yourself again. You realize silence is not punishment. It is protection, healing, and space for growth. It allows you to become stronger, softer, wiser, and more fully yourself. Meanwhile, the narcissist loses all control. They lose emotional supply, attention, and the version of themselves reflected in you. They lose the power they believed was permanent. Your silence becomes your freedom. Their silence becomes collapse. And as the quiet continues, you finally understand something you never saw before. You were not losing them. You were losing the version of yourself forced to shrink to keep them comfortable. You see, your silence is not a weapon, it is a boundary. It is the first moment in a long time where you choose yourself without asking for permission. The longer you stay in that space, the more truth emerges. You were never hard to love. You were simply giving your heart to someone who didn't know how to receive it. You were not too emotional. You were simply trying to connect with a person who could not meet you at the same depth. You were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. And in this quiet, the balance slowly shifts. Not in a dramatic display, not in revenge, not in anger, but in understanding. You begin to realize that their reaction to your silence reveals nothing about your value. It only shows the emptiness they were hiding behind their actions. Their panic is not proof of love. Their distress is not proof of change. It is only evidence that your absence removes the control they once relied on. And gradually, you start to breathe differently. You start to think differently. You begin to feel differently. You start choosing peace instead of chaos. You start choosing clarity instead of illusion. You start choosing yourself over the story they once made you believe. And as they wrestle with the collapse of their false identity, you rise. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, softly, in a way that feels real and true. You rise because the same silence that unsettles them rebuilds you. You rise because healing does not come from them returning. Healing comes from you coming back to yourself. And when you finally move forward with that understanding, something powerful shifts. You no longer long for the version of love that required you to give up your voice. You no longer crave the connection that drained your energy. You no longer chase the person who constantly showed you their emptiness while calling it love. You simply move on, not because you despise them, but because you love yourself more than the pain they caused. And that is the moment the story truly closes. Not when they reach back for you, not when they try to pull you in again, not when they realize what they have lost. The true ending comes when you no longer turn back, when your silence becomes your closure, when your peace becomes your answer, when the weight finally lifts off your body and you understand with calm certainty that losing them was never the real tragedy. The real tragedy was forgetting yourself, and the victory is that now you never will. You notice the subtle shifts inside you. The tension that once gripped you loosens. The anger that once kept you awake fades. You no longer replay every conversation or scrutinize every word. The desire to be understood, to be seen, to be validated, it no longer consumes you. Instead, you see clearly that what was missing was never something outside of you. It was always something within. And with that clarity, the illusions lose their power. The lies, the manipulations, the games, they all fall away, leaving a space that feels light, that feels free. You start to value your time differently. You start to invest in yourself differently. You begin to understand that every moment spent trying to fix someone else who could never meet you halfway was a moment stolen from your own growth, from your own joy, from your own life. And that realization, though quiet, is powerful. It whispers in your heart that you deserve better, that you always have. It whispers that love does not require sacrifice of your soul. It whispers that peace is not selfish. And as you listen, as you follow that whisper, you begin to build something new, something solid, something real. You begin to surround yourself with people who respect your boundaries, who honor your spirit, who celebrate your existence, rather than diminish it. You begin to choose environments that nurture rather than deplete. You begin to take up space unapologetically, not to provoke, not to challenge, but simply because you exist and you matter. And in that space, in that quiet reclamation of yourself, you discover a rhythm that does not depend on someone else's approval or validation, a rhythm that is steady, calm, and enduring. And the more you step into that rhythm, the less the past holds power over you. The memories, the disappointments, the heartbreaks, they lose their sting. They remain as lessons, not as chains. And you realize that freedom is not found in someone returning. Freedom is found in your willingness to never return to the place where you were diminished, to never return to the person who could not meet you. You begin to see that your worth is not conditional. Your joy is not negotiable. Your boundaries are not optional. And as that truth settles, you notice the world changes around you, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Doors that were once closed begin to open. Opportunities you never imagined appear. People who resonate with your frequency come into your life naturally. And the love you once thought you needed from someone else, the validation you once sought, it starts to come from within. You become your own safe place, your own home. And in that safety, you thrive, you grow, you shine. Not to punish anyone, not to prove anything, but because you can, because you finally remember yourself. And in remembering yourself, in reclaiming your voice, in choosing your peace over their chaos, you write a new story, a story that is unshakable, a story that is yours and yours alone. A story where loss is transformed into gain, where pain is transformed into wisdom, where silence is transformed into power. And as you walk forward in that story, the shadows of the past lose their grip. The echoes of their empty words fade. The illusions dissolve. And in that clarity, in that peace, you finally understand that the greatest love, the truest love, the love that heals all wounds begins and ends with you.